Testing. Testing. Oh. Very well. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for allowing us to speak tonight to you. I am Patrick McClanahan. I'm a volunteer director for the 12th Congressional District in Fort Worth. That's Kate Granger's Congressional District. I'm here with Prasika, and we're volunteers. George Soros does not pay us to go around talking about this. My background, I grew up, my family was in the manufacturing business. Radio stations. We made a lot of equipment for radio stations. My father sold his business in '94. He knows all about I've heard about taxes all my life. And the number one concern he had was not his competition. It was complying with the tax code, the owner's tax code. That was during the Jimmy Carter years. And you know, we've just seen how bad it is. And I'm convinced that something radical has to be done to change our system that we have right now. We have zero economic growth. We have an unbelievable debt, 14 to 15 trillion, and obligations. If you believe Bill Gross, PIMCO Investments, it's somewhere in the range of 120 trillion. A few interesting facts. You've probably heard some of these before about our current tax code, but we spend somewhere between $1.25 trillion just collecting revenue from this country. That's paying our CPAs, that's all the cost of compliance, paperwork. Average person spends about 27.5 hours. That includes the people that really don't pay taxes. Average 27.5 hours just preparing our taxes. We work until about April 12th of every year just to pay the taxes. The rest after that is ours. Congressional Budget Office estimates that corporations spend about $2 trillion just complying with the rules. Found through experience that you know, the number one consideration is how do we manipulate the tax code? How do we gain the most favorable advantage with the tax code? All of our behavior is dictated by this tax code. It's the number one business decision as far as ranking your, how you're going to make your basic business decision is how the tax code will affect it. You've probably heard that over half the American people don't even pay taxes. At least they don't think they do, because a number of economists, including Dale Jorgensen of Harvard, have estimated that there are about 22 cents of every dollar in everything we buy is corporate taxes that have been passed along to us. How many have heard the phrase that, well, I don't pay taxes, I actually get a refund? You know, that's the type of thinking where people just seem to think that they're not actually paying something. They're giving the government a tax, you know, interest-free loan for a few months. We still manage to borrow 40 cents of every dollar in addition to this system that, you know, we have over 100,000 IRS agents right now just to collect this tax, with several thousand more on the way thanks to Obamacare. If we know the audit process, if you're randomly selected for an audit, there's really a lack of due process in the current tax code. Many people will tell you that if you're dealing with the IRS, you pay them to go away. You know, it's just a very unfair process. There's no guilty until proven innocent. This is evolved into kind of a tribute system. Corporations pay different, we're supposed to have a 35% corporate tax rate. Oil and gas business, heavy industry, pay somewhere around 35%. If you're in the software business, it's effectively about 4%. The jobs that seem to be disappearing from our country are actually the ones that are the heavy equipment, you know, labor-intensive jobs. And it's the tax code that never gets blamed, but is really a major cause of jobs being driven overseas. It's a tribute system. You know, people try to gain advantage for their business through the tax code. They want a special favor. You have K Street lobbyists that you pay, and you try to get an advantage of yourself. The coal industry has an advantage over the gas industry because it pays, natural gas industry because it pays many millions more every year to access their Congress. The current tax code, we try to ask ourselves, how did we get to this place? We didn't start out this way. When our country first started, original 13 states, we funded our government with basic tariffs, just sales taxes on whiskey and tobacco. Occasionally, when you had something come up like the War of 1812, you throw in a tax on carriages. It wasn't until the Civil War when you first saw an income tax, because it was an emergency. It was necessary to try to raise revenues. Very hated. It immediately was rescinded after the Civil War. It wasn't until the panic of 1893 that you started seeing a movement for a taxation of the evil rich. In 1848, you had a publication of a very popular book called The Communist Manifesto in Europe. And as immigrants came to this country, this book became very popular. The idea that someone that's successful is successful because they've taken it out of the pockets of somebody else. You started the process in this country in the late 1890s because of that panic. And nothing really good, as you can tell, happens from an economic panic. The legislation that comes after that, or the stimulus, is usually much worse than the economic panic. About 20 years, people started the process of an income tax, and that was done through constitutional amendment. It was sold to people as a tax on your neighbor. Don't worry about the income tax. It's only for the 1.5% of the 1.5% of the top 1% we're supposed to pay an income tax. It was about 4%. And as the different states began to vote on ratification, you know, people thought, "Oh, it doesn't affect me. It's the rich guy down the street." And then within 5 years, the income tax was hitting most people at the top rate of about 80%. We've seen how the tax code has grown to a few hundred pages to 75,000 right now, and growing. With Obamacare, we have another couple hundred being written right now, including a tax on unearned income. But we've added over the years capital gains taxes, tax on investment, we added dividend taxes, estate taxes, gift taxes, withholding, Social Security, Medicare, and we still managed to borrow $14 trillion just to help make ends meet. I'm convinced that something has to be done to change what we're doing. It's choking out investment. We've put little speed bumps between every financial transaction we make with each other. We tax the same dollar of earnings multiple times. And I'm convinced that merely flattening this tax will reduce the rate, certainly, but we still have to fill out a term paper every April 15th and turn it in. We've managed to turn collecting of revenue into revealing a lot of information about yourself to the government. It's more than just collecting revenue. It's becoming social engineering. We need something that's more efficient, something that people, when they spend their money, they know exactly what tax they're going to pay. With that, I would just like to say that the fair tax, I think, is that answer. At only 135 pages, it dwarfs in size, I guess, or opposite. Well, anyway, the 75,000 pages of the current tax code. I believe the benefits of the tax code, as you'll see what Brian presents here, the fair tax to you, that the benefits are so obvious that everyone can get it, except for maybe a PhD in economics. That was a quote from Urban Crystal. But with that, I'll bring up Brian, and he'll go with basic tenets of the fair tax and how it will be beneficial in replacing our current tax code.
I'd like that. Is everybody going to be able to hear? Well, as Patrick said, we are volunteers, and one of the things, just turn around. As volunteers, we're here to pass what we believe is the gospel of the fair tax on to you, and we are so committed to that, and I am so committed to embarrassing Patrick in every possible opportunity that I want to mention that today is his birthday.
Happy birthday!
He is, I believe, 23, and his beautiful wife Tanya is pregnant with their first child, and he is here of his own accord and some arm twisting by me because I'm the one that got involved in this movement. So, with that, let's talk a little bit about the fair tax and how it works, and we'll do some comparison with flat tax and take your questions. But, go ahead. This is a quote I like from Thomas Jefferson: "That the system be established on the basis of income, and his just proportion on that scale has been already drawn from every one. To step into the field of consumption and tax special articles in that, as broadcloth or homespun wine or whiskey, a coach or a wagon, is doubly taxing the same article." And then another quote from one of our other great American patriots, Will Rogers: "The income tax has made more liars out of the American people than golf has." And I love the publication it's quoted from. "Helping the Girls with Their Income Taxes," from Illiterate Digest, 1924. Why do we need to change the tax code? Well, I think Patrick hit on a lot of the reasons we spend somewhere between $350 billion or maybe as much as $500 billion just in complying with federal tax code. It is onerous, it is complicated, it is ridiculous, it is something that is subject to abuse by taxpayers, politicians, lobbyists, and the IRS, particularly politicians who love to use the code in order to pick winners and losers or use it as their own form of social engineering. It is widely considered unfair and inefficient. It's difficult to collect and difficult to enforce. And there are a lot of people who not only don't pay taxes, but 47% of people that pay no federal income tax, that you hear that statistic thrown out all the time. The other statistic you never hear thrown out, because they have no way of knowing for sure how many people fall under this umbrella, but is the people who manage to evade the tax because their income is concealed. The underground economy, whether it be drug dealers, cash payments to people who are collecting Social Security, disability, illegal aliens, whoever the case may be. Berkshire Hathaway, Patrick said, just kidding. And just a little bit about winners and losers under the current corporate tax code. Patrick said different industries and different companies are taxed very differently. Some of you have probably heard that General Electric, for example, where our illustrious job czar hails as CEO, paid no federal income taxes last year effectively because of the different subsidies and incentives given for creating quote-unquote green jobs, whereas other industries and other companies, particularly in oil and gas, or for example, you see companies like United Healthcare, Target, Home Depot, etc., taxed at much higher rates, whereas a GE or a pharmaceutical company like Merck pays substantially less. So we don't have what you consider to be a fair code from that standpoint. It is complicated as all get out. We have, as Patrick mentioned, in 2006 we had about 67,000 pages of code. It's currently at over 72,000 pages and counting. Obamacare added, eventually will add something like 16,000 new IRS agents, and you are essentially guilty until proven innocent when Big Brother finds something wrong with your corporate or your personal income tax return. So, what we have is a problem here that Mayor Leopard and other people who run their own businesses will understand that it is antithetical to economic growth when businesses make decisions based more on what the tax implications are, and this applies to individuals too, than what the sound business principles, how do I sell more widgets, and so forth. What is the best decision to help create jobs, grow my business, as opposed to what are the tax implications of that. It's estimated that compliance with the code and the drag on our efficiencies is somewhere between 2 and 5% of our annual gross domestic product. So that puts U.S. Domestic corporations at a competitive disadvantage against multinational and international competitors. We now have, and some of you may be aware of the fact, we used to have the second highest corporate income tax rate in the industrialized developed world. But good news, we are now first, because after the tsunami and the nuclear issues in Japan, they lowered their corporate tax rate to try and help offset some of the implications of those disasters. Back. Did I miss something? Oh, okay. So this is something that drives, everyone hears about jobs being driven offshore. Well, when you have the highest corporate income tax rate in the developed world, it's really only natural that when you call customer service or the help center, everybody's seen the Discover card commercials where they've got the Croatian guy or whatever answering somebody outside the United States answering the phone. Well, there's obviously a reason for that. Again.
Peggy.
Peggy, yes. He's a high school algebra teacher. He's not a professional actor. I don't know if you guys know.
Actually, that's what you get when you call 1-800-RON.
There you go. I don't think they've got that set up yet. They're not taking calls. Yeah. And the real irony of all this is, you hear all this class warfare, you hear all of these, well, these evil corporations can afford it, the small business owners can afford it, and so forth. Corporations don't pay taxes. People pay taxes. Individuals pay taxes. Corporations, when they are faced with the proposition of paying higher taxes, are going to do one of a few different things. They're going to cut costs in one of several different ways. They'll maybe lay off jobs, cut salaries, or reduce the growth of wages for their employees. Maybe they reduce their shareholder dividends, or they pass those things along to us in the form of higher prices. So that's not all of these arguments over what's a fair amount for corporations to pay are really kind of irrelevant, because as Patrick mentioned, we'll get to it again further down in the presentation. But corporations are passing those costs along to the people anyway. So we've got obviously some other issues we need to deal with. We have a declining ratio of workers to retirees, and funding issues for Social Security and Medicare are on precarious footing. Patrick mentioned it, Mayor Leopard mentioned both, that we're in a situation where we're not $15 trillion in debt. We have some $38 trillion in unfunded liability to Medicare. We have close to $20 trillion in unfunded liability to Social Security, because Republicans and Democrats alike, these crooks, have been robbing the Social Security and Medicare trust since the Johnson administration. So we've got our entitlements as an increasingly large percentage of the budget. We're at near zero growth. We have approximately $12 to $15 trillion in investment capital that's tied up offshore, because there's a 35% repatriation rate tax that would be assessed on that money, that these foreign subsidiaries of United States corporations are not returning back in new investment to the United States to create new jobs here, because they're taxed so punitively. This punishes work, savings and investment, and reduces the capital available for productivity gains, and it drives our savings rate down, because we're not doing anything to reward savings and investment in this country. I love this, and I threw this into the presentation just because I remember last November, last December, the whole showdown over whether we were going to let the Bush tax cuts roll back, or which groups we were going to let them roll back on. It was going to be the richest Americans, the $200,000 crowd, millionaires, billionaires, you always hear the rhetoric, and so forth. And eventually we did come up with a compromise, and it lasted about 6 months. And I remember at the time seeing all these headlines, seeing these showdowns over fair share, over whether we were going to let the Bush tax cuts expire, the sunset provision, the 10-year sunset provision that was put on the Bush tax cuts, etc., and thinking when the compromise that they came up with was, we are going to permanently extend the tax cuts for the middle class, and for the $200,000 and up crowd for individuals, $250,000 for households, we are going to temporarily extend them for 2 years. And I thought to myself, are we really going to have this showdown again in 2 years? And I was wrong. We didn't. It took less time than that. So, and again, another punchline is that regardless of what marginal tax rates were since World War II, whether the highest marginal tax rate was 90% or whether it was 35%, total federal revenue as a percentage of GDP, what they're collecting from the people as a percentage of gross domestic product, did not significantly change. It's been about 19% since World War II. In fact, we even have a name for this phenomenon. It's called Hauser's Law. An economist named Hauser says, no matter what tax rates have been in post-war America, tax revenues have remained about 19.5% of GDP. And here's a quote. He said, higher taxes discourage the animal spirits of entrepreneurship. When tax rates are raised, taxpayers are encouraged to shift, hide, and underreport income. Taxpayers divert their effort from pro-growth, productive investments to seeking tax shelters, tax havens, and tax-exempt investments. This behavior tends to dampen economic growth and job creation. Lower taxes increase the incentives to work, produce, save, and invest, thereby encouraging capital formation and jobs. Taxpayers have less incentive to shift and to shelter and shift income. So in other words, what we need is a solution for tax reform that will actually grow gross domestic product. Instead of this arguing about what the rates are going to be, we need to figure out what sort of tax system is going to grow the economy at a faster rate than the 0.5% roughly annualized rate of growth that we're plodding along at today. If we're going to pay for the issues that we have in terms of entitlement, budget crisis, in terms of the deficit crisis, the debt ceiling, all of these things, we have to grow the economy faster. That is issue number one. And I know that one of the things that a lot of people talk about when we come in and present these fair taxes is they want to talk about spending. Well, there's no proposal that the numbers that we're going to be talking about are revenue neutral to the federal government. That's how they were arrived at. People say, well, you're not addressing the issue of reforming spending. Well, one thing at a time. First and foremost, we've got to grow the economy faster if we're going to catch up, because we are so far in the hole right now. So, fair tax will be the largest transfer of power from the federal, I don't have that in there, but let me just emphasize, federal government back into the hands of the people since the American Revolution. A little bit of background on the fair tax. 3 Houston businessmen, God bless Texas. In 1994, Jack Trotter, Bob McNair, and Leo Lindbeck each pledged about $1.5 million of seed money to research an effective way to collect revenue to fund the federal government. Not with any social engineering model in mind, any redistribution of wealth, any of those types of things, but just what is a common sense, no nonsense way to fund the federal government. And since then, shift back to Spain. They've gone on to raise an additional $17 million to fund focus groups, to research policies, experts like Stephen Moore at the Cato Institute, which I know some of you probably see on Fox Business, Fox News frequently, Professor Dale Jorgensen of Harvard, Bill Beach, economist with the Heritage Foundation, and others have endorsed the fair tax. It's got a huge groundswell of support from leading economists. It's one of, I'm not going to say the most, but it's one of the most researched pieces of legislation ever put before the United States Congress. Currently in Texas, we have John Cornyn is a co-sponsor of the Senate bill. Kay Granger, Ralph Hall, Jeb Enserling here in the area. In fact, I think we have 24 GOP representatives in the state of Texas. We've got 13 of them, I think, signed on board with the fair tax now. So we're working on Joe Barton and Bill Flores and so forth. But we've got a lot of support. More than half of the representatives in Texas are co-sponsors. So how does fair tax work? It's a 23% consumption tax levied on goods and services at the retail level only. Okay? All new consumer goods and services, so that they are taxed only once. No tax on business-to-business production costs and so forth, which, as we already talked about, just get passed along to the consumer end. So, Understanding our current retail pricing system, you pay income taxes and federal sales taxes now. Patrick mentioned, Harvard did a study. The average retail product already has a 22% embedded sales tax, embedded tax in it. 22 cents of every dollar that you spend is the cost to the corporation that's passed along in the form of their prices of their corporate income tax, their payroll matching costs of their payroll taxes, any other taxes that they're paying get passed along to the consumer in the form of higher prices. So what you're currently paying already is about 22% embedded cost. So prices will stabilize. Prices will not rise by 23% by adding fair tax. They will stabilize and predicted eventually to decrease. But in a competitive market for goods and services, go ahead. What you're basically doing is you're taking the embedded tax costs that are already in the cost of a product out, because you're taking away. The fair tax will replace estate taxes, corporate income taxes, personal income taxes, payroll taxes, investment taxes such as taxes on dividends, capital gains, etc. You pull all of those out, fair tax cost goes in. You're looking on average at roughly similar cost in terms of retail goods and services. So no taxes collected on used items. Education, tuition are the big exemption because that's considered an investment. Make sense? Savings and investments are not taxed. Gifts are not taxed. Base interest is not taxed. This is one thing that even under our current tax code, for some of you that are seniors or close to retirement, investing for your retirement, one thing that anybody who knows anything about investing in the stock market that Patrick or anybody talked to, and we work quite a bit in that world, will tell you is if you bought a stock 50 years ago for $5 a share, if you sold it tomorrow, you don't get to adjust your cost basis for inflation. So if it's $50 a share today, they go, well, you made $45 a share. You got to pay capital gains on that. Well, that's ridiculous because everybody knows that that's not what you made if you consider what inflation has done, the value of that investment, the value, the cost of that stock in terms of the share price. So, tax is not taxed on anything. As I said, that's not taxed. So retailers will collect the fair tax at the point of sale and forward that tax to the state, and the state's forward the tax to the U.S. Treasury. States and retailers are paid 0.25%, which is not dissimilar to what they're doing on the state sales tax now in those 46 states. And in terms of transition, this is one of the things that would make implementing the fair tax very easy. In fact, I think more efficient because you're funding on an ongoing basis when people consume. They're paying the tax as opposed to waiting for people to file their income tax return. And this is how we got into the practice of withholding federal taxes from your paycheck to begin with. This was something, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but during World War II, because people used to, when income taxes were lower, would just write a check on April 15th for their tax obligations or quarterly, send it in the IRS. But the government decided that to fund World War II, we needed to have that tax flow sped up. We can't wait till April 15th. We've got to have more current funding to help fund the war effort. So we're going to start this practice of withholding your income taxes. Your employer will withhold those from your paycheck. And when we get to April 15th, you'll reconcile the difference between what's been withheld and what you determine from your tax return that you owe. And when the war is over, can anybody guess? We'll stop. Yeah. How'd that work out? You get your entire paycheck, no deduction. So use it. I give this example. Say somebody's making, just to use round figures, which are like $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. Everybody knows, you see the withholding process and how it works from your paycheck. By the time you get that $5,000 a month after federal income tax withholding, 6.2% Social Security, 1.45, whatever it is on Medicare withholding, so forth, you may have more like $4,100, $4,200. So now everybody gets their entire paycheck. When they consume, they pay the tax. prices you pay now essentially drop by 22 cents on every dollar, and then the fair tax is paid on top of that. You receive a monthly prebate based on the size of your household. This is one of the things, and I know that Julie, Janice, some of you mentioned you want us to kind of contrast this with the with the flat tax, for example. This is one area where this really stands out in contrast to the flat tax, and in terms of making it more politically viable, because people will say, well, gosh, the flat tax is going to be more punitive toward lower income households. If everybody's paying income taxes at the same rate, then people that are only making $35,000. So the fair tax is actually more progressive toward the working poor than a flat tax, because there is a monthly prebate. And the prebate basically assures that anybody earning up to what the Department of Health and Human Services considers to be the poverty level, if they spend 100% of what they consume, they will pay no taxes, because the prebate will, you can go ahead and look. The prebate will be sent to every family based on family size. And it's basically the Department of Health and Human Services poverty rate divided by 12 times 23%. So every household that files will get a prebate check to cover the tax cost of basic necessities. Does that make sense? You must be a legal resident with a valid Social Security number. Sometimes they get applause. And the combination of removing the regressive payroll tax, because this is another thing about Social Security and payroll taxes. When Social Security was rolled out, it was you pay 1%, your employer pays 1%. Now that's gone up to 6.2% employer, 6.2% you. That's 12.4% of your pay. If you're self-employed, it's 12.4% of your paycheck. And it's really increased about 14-fold when you adjust for the increases to the Social Security, the taxable wage base. So you're paying substantially more in payroll taxes, and even those 47% that pay no federal income taxes currently, they are paying a much higher rate of taxes probably than their counterparts were near the inception of Social Security and so forth, and, because payroll taxes have gone so drastically within the last few decades. Application for the prebate is voluntary, so Warren Buffett does not have to sign on for a prebate check. He does not want to. This is basically a prebate schedule. See roughly how it works. I'll send this to you if anybody wants it, but I'm not going to stay on this slide long enough for everybody to absorb it. I think you got the general idea. Repeals taxation of Social Security benefits and wages. Again, payroll taxes go away. Ends federal gift and estate taxes and capital gains taxes. The prebate zeroes out taxes on basic household necessities. No tax assessed on the purchase of used items. And if you go back to what we were talking about the embedded costs already in, and the embedded tax is already in those products, those used products, that makes a lot of sense not to do that anymore. And it makes it, again, more transparent, because you're not passing on those costs at every single level in production or so forth. Ends all record keeping for federal tax purposes, eliminates current hidden embedded taxes I mentioned. Hopefully ensures that your grandchildren have the same opportunity you did, and in terms of keeping these programs, these entitlement programs that continue to be a ever larger portion of our federal budget on a safer footing. And the employer will still report gross earnings to the Social Security Department for benefit determination, Medicaid as well. We get a lot of questions on that, so I just want to make sure we cover that. Benefits are indexed to inflation on after-tax basis to ensure